Detective Marcus Webb had been with the Seattle Police Department for 16 years, and he'd always believed in the system. He believed that good cops outnumbered bad ones, that justice eventually prevailed, that the truth always came out. Then he stumbled onto something that shattered every belief he'd ever held about the institution he'd dedicated his life to. It started with what should have been a simple case on a rainy October evening in 2022. A call came in about a break-in at a warehouse in the industrial district. Marcus was working late, finishing paperwork, when dispatch asked if he could take it since he was closest to the scene. He grabbed his keys and headed out, expecting to spend an hour taking statements and filing a report. He had no idea that responding to that call would cost him everything and expose corruption that reached the highest levels of city government. When Marcus arrived at the warehouse, the owner was waiting outside. A nervous man in his 60s named David Park. "Thank God you're here, Detective. They broke in through the back. I don't think they took anything, but I haven't done a full inventory yet." Marcus followed him inside, flashlight in hand. The warehouse stored commercial electronics, rows and rows of boxes containing computers and equipment. Nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. Then Marcus noticed something odd. One section in the back corner had fresh pry marks on the lock, but the boxes inside were still sealed. Marcus examined the area more carefully. Whoever broke in had clearly been looking for something specific. He asked David to check the inventory records for that section. David pulled up his computer and his face went pale. "That's strange. According to this, those boxes were picked up 2 weeks ago by a company called Meridian Logistics, but they're still here." Marcus felt his detective instincts kick in. "Do you have paperwork for that pickup?" David searched through his files and found a delivery receipt, signed and stamped, official looking. But the boxes it referenced were sitting right in front of them. Marcus took photos of everything. The receipt, the boxes, the serial numbers on the equipment. Something wasn't adding up. "Mr. Park, has anything like this happened before?" David hesitated, then nodded slowly. "A few times over the past year, phantom pickups where paperwork shows items were collected, but they're still here. I thought it was just filing errors. I run a small operation. Things get messy sometimes." Marcus's instincts were screaming now. This wasn't filing errors. This was something else. "I'm going to need copies of all those receipts and any security footage you have." Back at the station, Marcus started digging. The company listed on the receipts, Meridian Logistics, was registered in Delaware but operated locally. When Marcus called their listed phone number, it went to voicemail. Their website was bare bones, generic, red flags everywhere. Marcus ran the company through various databases and found something interesting. Meridian Logistics had contracts with multiple city departments. They handled transportation and storage for seized property, evidence transfers, even some work for the police department itself. Marcus pulled records of items that Meridian had supposedly transported for the police department over the past year. Cross-referencing with actual evidence logs, he found discrepancies, items listed as transferred by Meridian that had never arrived at their destination, evidence that had gone missing with Meridian's name on the transfer paperwork. Marcus felt his stomach turn. This looked like a systematic operation to steal from evidence lockups and city warehouses using fake paperwork to cover the thefts. Marcus brought his findings to his sergeant, a veteran cop named Tom Rodriguez, who'd been his mentor for years. Tom listened to everything, examined the evidence Marcus had compiled, and his expression grew darker. "Marcus, this is heavy. If Meridian is stealing from city departments and covering it with fake paperwork, someone inside had to be helping them. Someone with access to official forms, stamps, authorization codes. Marcus nodded. That's what worries me. This isn't some outside crew. This is inside help. Maybe multiple people. Tom was quiet for a long moment. You need to take this higher. This goes beyond our department. You should contact Internal Affairs and maybe the District Attorney's office. Marcus agreed. He spent the next week building an airtight case. He documented every discrepancy, every missing item, every fake receipt. He created a timeline showing the pattern of thefts going back 18 months. He identified over $200,000 worth of missing property and evidence. Then he requested a meeting with Internal Affairs. The IA detective assigned to meet with him was a woman named Captain Lisa Morrison. She had a reputation for being tough, but fair. Marcus laid out everything he'd found. Walking her through months of evidence, Lisa listened carefully, taking notes, asking sharp questions. When he finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. Detective Webb, this is explosive. If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at organized theft, evidence tampering, possibly obstruction of justice. And you're right that it requires inside help. Do you have any suspects? Marcus pulled out another file. I've narrowed it down to people who would have had access to the paperwork and authorization systems. It's a short list. 6 people across different departments who all had the access needed to facilitate these thefts. He slid the list across the desk. Lisa looked at it, and her expression changed, became carefully neutral. Detective Webb, some of these names are very high-ranking officials. Do you understand the implications of what you're alleging? Marcus met her eyes. I understand that evidence is being stolen, and someone's getting rich doing it. Rank doesn't matter when it comes to corruption. Lisa closed the folder. I need time to review this thoroughly. Don't discuss this investigation with anyone else. Not your sergeant, not your partner, nobody. If there are corrupt officials involved, we can't risk tipping them off. I'll contact you within 48 hours. Marcus left the meeting, feeling like he'd done the right thing. He'd followed protocol, brought it to the proper authorities, let the system handle it. He went home that night believing justice would be served 2 days later. Marcus was called into the office of Deputy Chief Harold Burke. Marcus had met Burke a few times at department events, but they'd never worked together directly. Burke was a political animal, known for his connections to the mayor's office and city council. When Marcus entered the office, Burke wasn't alone. There were 2 other men Marcus didn't recognize, both in expensive suits. Burke's expression was cold. Detective Webb, sit down. Marcus sat, immediately sensing something was wrong. Burke slid a folder across the desk. Do you know what this is? Marcus opened it and felt his blood run cold. It was his Internal Affairs report. Every page of his investigation. Internal Affairs shared your allegations with command staff, as is protocol for cases involving high-ranking officials. We've reviewed your claims thoroughly. Burke leaned forward. Detective, your investigation is based on faulty premises and misinterpreted data. The discrepancies you identified have reasonable explanations: clerical errors, timing issues with database updates, standard complications in evidence management. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Sir, with respect, these aren't clerical errors. This is a pattern of systematic theft with documentation to support it. One of the suited men spoke up. Detective Webb, I'm Richard Ashford, City Attorney. The individuals you've named in your report are respected public servants. Your allegations, if made public, could damage reputations and expose the city to liability. We've investigated your claims and found no evidence of criminal activity. Marcus stared at him. "You investigated in 2 days what took me months to compile?" Burke's voice was sharp. "We're telling you to drop this, Webb. There's nothing here. You've misread the situation and wasted valuable resources pursuing a phantom case. Consider this matter closed." Marcus felt anger rising. "And if I don't consider it closed?" The room went silent. Burke's expression turned threatening. "Then you'll be pursuing it as a private citizen. You're a good detective, Webb. Don't throw away your career over a case that doesn't exist." Marcus left that meeting knowing exactly what was happening. He'd found real corruption, and the people involved had enough power to shut down the investigation. Internal Affairs hadn't investigated his claims. They'd reported them to the very people he was investigating. And now, those people were threatening his career to keep him quiet. Marcus went home and made copies of everything. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. He stored copies in 3 different locations. If they thought he'd just walk away, they were wrong. The retaliation started small. Marcus was reassigned from detective work to administrative duties, desk work, filing, scheduling. When he protested, he was told it was temporary, just until some staffing issues were resolved. Then his performance reviews, which had always been exemplary, suddenly became critical. Small infractions were documented. He was written up for being late, even though he'd been on time. His clearance to access certain databases was revoked without explanation. They were building a paper trail to justify firing him. Marcus reached out to a lawyer, a criminal defense attorney named James Chen, who had a reputation for taking on police misconduct cases. James listened to everything and agreed to represent Marcus. "They're trying to push you out before you can go public. We need to move fast. Have you considered going to the media?" Marcus had thought about it, but worried about burning bridges, James was direct. "Marcus, they're already burning those bridges. You need to understand that you're up against people with serious power. The only weapon you have is public exposure." Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He contacted an investigative journalist named Sarah Mitchell, who worked for the Seattle Times. Sarah had broken several corruption stories over the years and had a reputation for protecting her sources. They met in a coffee shop far from downtown, and Marcus handed her a USB drive containing everything he'd found. Sarah reviewed the documents right there, her expression growing more intense with each page. "Detective Webb, this is Pulitzer-level corruption. If even half of this is true, heads are going to roll. But you understand what this means for you?" Marcus nodded. "I've already lost my career. They're going to fire me no matter what I do. At least this way, the truth comes out." Sarah met his eyes. "I'll protect you as much as I can, but they'll figure out who my source is. They'll come after you hard." Marcus thought about all the stolen evidence, about criminals who'd walked free because evidence had disappeared, about taxpayer money being stolen. "I don't care. This needs to see daylight." The story ran on a Sunday morning, front page of the Seattle Times. Systematic theft from police evidence rooms linked to city officials. Sarah had done her homework, verifying Marcus's findings independently, finding additional evidence, interviewing other sources. The article named names, including Deputy Chief Burke and 2 city council members who sat on the police oversight committee. The public reaction was explosive. By Monday morning, the mayor was holding a press conference promising a full independent investigation. That same Monday, Marcus was called into the police chief's office. Chief Raymond Park looked like he hadn't slept. "Webb, did you leak that investigation to the press?" Marcus didn't lie. "Yes, sir. After my findings were buried and I was threatened into silence, I felt I had no choice. Chief Park's face reddened. You violated department policy, broke chain of command, and exposed ongoing investigations to the media. You're suspended without pay, effective immediately pending termination proceedings. Marcus had expected this, but it still hurt. 16 years of service, dozens of commendations, hundreds of cases solved. None of it mattered because he'd exposed corruption among the powerful. Marcus cleaned out his desk while other detectives watched in silence. Some looked sympathetic, others looked away. Nobody stood with him. Nobody spoke up. The message was clear. This is what happens when you challenge the system. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Marcus was terminated officially, and he filed a wrongful termination lawsuit. The city fought back hard, painting Marcus as a disgruntled employee who'd manufactured allegations to justify leaking confidential information. They brought in character witnesses who suddenly remembered problems with Marcus's work. They produced performance reviews that hadn't existed before. They spent taxpayer money on expensive lawyers to destroy the detective who tried to expose them stealing taxpayer money. But Sarah Mitchell kept digging. She found more victims, more missing evidence, more fake paperwork. She discovered that the stolen property was being sold through online marketplaces, with proceeds going to offshore accounts connected to shell companies. She traced those companies back to individuals, including Deputy Chief Burke's brother-in-law. The web of corruption was even deeper than Marcus had realized. It wasn't just theft. It was organized crime, operating within the police department itself. The FBI got involved after Sarah's follow-up stories. Federal agents started investigating. And suddenly people were nervous. The city attorney, who dismissed Marcus's allegations, resigned suddenly. One of the named city council members announced she wouldn't seek re-election. Deputy Chief Burke took early retirement. They were all running, trying to distance themselves before the federal hammer came down. But it was too late. Marcus had started something that couldn't be stopped. The federal investigation took 8 months. Marcus cooperated fully, turning over all his evidence, testifying before a grand jury. The stress was enormous. He'd lost his job, his career, his sense of identity, his marriage strained under the pressure. Some days he wondered if speaking up had been worth destroying his life. Then he'd remember why he'd become a cop in the first place: to protect people, to uphold justice. And he realized that's exactly what he'd done, even when the system itself was corrupt. The indictments came down on a Friday afternoon. 8 people charged with conspiracy, theft, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Deputy Chief Burke faced the most serious charges, looking at 20 years in federal prison. 2 city officials, 3 police department employees, and 2 civilians connected to Meridian Logistics were also arrested. The scope of the theft was staggering. Over $3 million in stolen property over 3 years. Evidence that had disappeared from dozens of criminal cases, some resulting in guilty people walking free. The public outcry was intense. Citizens demanded accountability. The police chief resigned. The mayor faced calls for his resignation. A special prosecutor was appointed to review every case that had been affected by the evidence theft. Some convictions had to be overturned. Some criminals had to be retried. The damage to the justice system was immense. And it had all been happening under everyone's noses until one detective decided to look closer. Marcus's wrongful termination case was settled quietly. The city agreed to reinstate him with full back pay and benefits, clear his record completely, and pay a substantial settlement. It was a tacit admission that they'd been wrong, that Marcus had been right all along. But Marcus didn't want his job back. Too much had happened. Too many people had betrayed him. He couldn't go back to working alongside people who'd watched him be destroyed and stayed silent. Instead, Marcus used his settlement money to start a private investigation firm, specializing in police corruption and misconduct cases. He became an expert witness in civil rights cases, helping lawyers understand how police departments operate and where corruption can hide. He consulted with other police departments on integrity and accountability. He'd found a new way to do the work he cared about outside the broken system he'd once believed in. The criminal trials were lengthy and well publicized. Sarah Mitchell covered every moment, her reporting earning her recognition and awards. Deputy Chief Burke was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. The others received sentences ranging from 3 to 12 years. Millions in stolen property and assets were seized. It was justice finally, even if it had taken too long and cost too much. 1 year after the indictments, Marcus was invited to speak at the police academy. The new chief wanted him to talk to recruits about integrity and moral courage. Marcus stood in front of a room full of young people who'd just committed to law enforcement careers, and he told them the truth. You're going to face moments where doing the right thing costs you everything, where standing up means standing alone, where the system you've sworn to serve will pressure you to look away from corruption and abuse. Marcus paused, looking at their earnest faces. I lost my career. I lost relationships. I went through hell, and I'd do it all again without hesitation. Because at the end of the day, the badge doesn't make you a good cop. Your choices make you a good cop. And when you have to choose between protecting a corrupt system and protecting the truth, choose the truth every single time, even when it costs you everything. The room was silent. Some of the recruits had tears in their eyes. They understood they were being taught something most police officers never hear, that sometimes the greatest threat to justice comes from within. After his speech, a young recruit approached Marcus. Detective Webb, what you did, exposing all that corruption, it must have been terrifying. How did you find the courage? Marcus thought about that night in the warehouse, about the moment he'd realized something was wrong, about the choice to keep digging when he could have just filed a report and moved on. I didn't feel courageous. I felt scared every single day. But I had evidence of crimes, and as a police officer, I'd sworn to investigate crimes. It was that simple. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right, even when you're terrified of the consequences. Marcus rebuilt his life slowly. The private investigation firm grew. He remarried to a lawyer he'd met through his court cases. He found peace in knowing he'd stood up when it mattered. The nightmares faded. The anger cooled. What remained was a hard-won wisdom about how power works, how corruption spreads, and how much courage it takes to fight back against it. Marcus had learned that the system doesn't protect whistleblowers. The system protects itself. And real change only happens when individuals are willing to sacrifice their place in that system to expose its failures. 2 years after the corruption scandal broke, Seattle's police department had been transformed. New oversight measures were in place. Independent auditors reviewed evidence. Handling anonymous reporting systems allowed officers to report corruption without fear of retaliation. The changes were named the Webb Protocols, after the detective whose investigation had exposed the need for them. Marcus was invited to the ceremony announcing the reforms, and he stood in the audience watching the police chief praise his courage. It felt surreal. The same department that had fired him, threatened him, tried to destroy him, was now celebrating him. Marcus understood it was politics, public relations, the system trying to absorb and neutralize his challenge to it, but he also recognized that real changes had been made. Future officers would have protections he hadn't had. Future corruption might be caught earlier. His sacrifice had created something meaningful, even if it had come at tremendous personal cost. Marcus met with some of the other officers who'd been caught up in the corruption scandal. The honest cops who'd lost their careers because stolen evidence had compromised their cases. They formed a support group, meeting monthly to share experiences and help each other navigate the aftermath. Many had left law enforcement entirely. Some, like Marcus, had found new ways to pursue justice. All of them carried scars from choosing integrity over institutional loyalty. But they also carried pride in having stood for something that mattered. Sarah Mitchell published a book about the scandal, Blue Wall, the detective who broke the code of silence. It became a bestseller, bringing national attention to issues of police corruption and the retaliation whistleblowers face. Marcus was approached by multiple Hollywood producers interested in his story. He turned them all down. This wasn't about fame or money. It was about the principle that nobody, regardless of their power or position, should be above the law. Marcus continued his work, investigating corruption, taking cases that larger firms wouldn't touch. He specialized in helping other whistleblowers navigate the brutal process of exposing wrongdoing from within institutions. He knew what they were facing because he'd lived it. The isolation, the threats, the financial devastation, the betrayal by colleagues. Marcus could guide them through it, help them document everything, connect them with lawyers and journalists who could protect them. He became a guardian for those brave enough to speak truth to power. 5 years after that rainy October night in the warehouse, Marcus stood at a podium accepting an award from a civil liberties organization for courage in public service. He looked out at the audience, filled with activists, lawyers, journalists, and other whistleblowers. "I didn't set out to be a hero," he told them. "I set out to be a good detective. And when I found evidence of crimes, I did what any good detective should do. I investigated." The fact that this made me a threat to powerful people says everything about how broken our systems are. Marcus continued, his voice strong. "Real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. It's about losing everything and knowing you'd make the same choice again. Every person in this room who's stood up to corruption, who's spoken truth when silence was safer, who's sacrificed their career for their principles, you're the real heroes. You're the ones keeping the system honest. And you're the reason I still have hope that justice can prevail." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Marcus looked out at faces that understood exactly what he'd been through because they'd been through it themselves. These were the people who'd chosen integrity over security, truth over comfort, justice over self-preservation. They were the thin line, protecting society from the corruption that thrives in darkness. And Marcus was honored to stand among them. Marcus's son, now 12 years old, asked him once why he'd done it, why he'd given up a good career to expose corruption when he could have just looked away. Marcus thought carefully about his answer. "Because someday you're going to face a choice between what's easy and what's right. And I needed to show you, not just tell you, that we choose what's right. Always, even when it costs us everything. That's how we live with ourselves, That's how we make the world better, one honest choice at a time. The legacy of Marcus's investigation continued to ripple outward. Other police departments reviewed their evidence procedures. Other cities examined their contracting processes. Other detectives found courage to report corruption they'd been afraid to expose. Marcus's choice to speak up had given others permission to do the same. The blue wall of silence had cracks in it now, and light was getting through. Marcus never regretted his decision. Even on the hardest days, he'd lost his career in law enforcement, but he'd kept his integrity. He'd faced down powerful people trying to silence him, and he'd won. He'd shown his children what real courage looked like. And he'd helped create a system that was just a little bit more honest, a little bit more accountable, that was worth every sacrifice he'd made. If Marcus's story made you think about what real courage costs, if it made you wonder how deep corruption goes in systems we trust, then subscribe right now. Next week, I'm bringing you the story of the journalist who uncovered a conspiracy that went all the way to the governor's office, and what happened when she published it will leave you absolutely stunned. The truth always comes with a price. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have done what Marcus did? Would you sacrifice everything for the truth? Smash that like button, and let's keep telling stories about people who refuse to be silenced. See you next week.